Now we'll discuss the question number 20th of the GS paper 3, which again pertains to security. The question was on expected lines and was related to terror financing. The motive was the motive of asking the question was simple, that no money for terror conference was basically organized last year in India, and the question find motivation from there. The question here says that major sources of terror funding in India should be listed, and the efforts that have been made to curtail these sources is also to be told. And in this slide, we need to discuss the aim and the objective of the NMFT conference that happened in India. So question basically has three parts. First, we have to identify the major source of terror funding in India, the efforts that have been made to curtail these funding, and also what were the basic aims and objectives as well as the outcome from the NMFT conference. So the first part will deal with terrorism. We'll basically define the terrorism in very brief, and we'll understand it by that terrorism is defined as a systematic use of violence to basically create a general climate of fear. And this is done to attain a political objective. But terrorism, like any other activity, needs finances, and thus we'll also include, and for this purpose it needs financing for recruitment, planning, and executing their vicious activities. So through our introduction we have highlighted what basically is the role of terrorism, and to fulfill this political objective, terrorism basically needs financing. Now the financing mechanism for terrorism is both external as well as internal. The external sources of financing includes religious donation. There is a concept of zakat, but though the zakat has a positive orientation, sometimes it has been seen that this zakat is also used for terror financing. Also, the second source of terror financing is that from radical charities, which comes in the form of funding from agencies like that of Jamaat-ud Dawa or Lashkar-e-Taiba in Pakistan. Next source of terror financing in India, which has been analyzed by security agencies, is coming from the way of remittances. Indian extremist groups receive foreign remittances, which is coming notably from the Gulf and has been raising concern for India. Counterfeit currency is also an external source of terror financing, and this technique has been utilized by Pakistan, where it utilizes counterfeit Indian currency sourced both domestically and internationally, which is used to fund the terrorist groups. The next external source of terror financing in India is coming from the narco finance, that is the linkage between narcotics and terrorism. Drug trafficking, primarily from Afghanistan, provides substantial amount of this narco finance or the linkages between terrorism and narcotics. There's also reports of state-sponsored terrorism. And the state sponsoring of terrorism, particularly with regard to India, comes from the Pakistan. And this is done by the way of charities, NGOs, drug trafficking, zakat donation, counterfeit currency, etc. But apart from the external sources, there are also internal sources of terror financing in India. These internal sources of terror financing in India utilizes the network of organized crime, where the linkages between organized crime and terrorism is being used. They also resort to extortion in some parts of India, illegal or parallel modes of taxation. Sometimes hawala is also utilized for sponsoring the terrorist activities. And recently, there have been use of overground workers or the support from the overground workers in different part of Indian territories, thus boosting the terror financing in India. So these are internal as well as the external sources of terror financing that is happening and particularly targeting India. In this regard, India has taken various steps. The first step that has been taken by India is the passing of Prevention of Money Laundering Act and the Financial Intelligence Unit, which is receiving reports on suspicious transactions with regard to terror financing. The empowerment of Enforcement Directorate has also been done in the recent time, which investigates the money laundering offenses and also coordinate internationally to curb the money laundering finances, which can be reutilized for terror financing. There is also creation of a combating for financing of terrorism cell that is also known as the CFT cell, which basically serves for the purpose of restricting terror funding and address the terror funding cases. Amendments have also been made to laws like that of UAPA, that is Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, and the scope of such acts has been expanded. And the last is that from international collaboration that India is engaging in, and this international collaboration is in the form of India's membership and advocacy regarding the state sponsorship of terrorism in FATF, that is the Financial Action Task Force. It also includes membership of groups like Eurasian Group, etc. So these are the steps that have been implemented by India. And in this regard, No Money for Terror conference was also organized in India. Now, from the very name, it is clear that No Money for Terror conference basically aims to stop the terror funding. And for this purpose, it was recognized during the conference that there is a differentiation between fighting a terrorist and fighting terrorism. You can basically fight a terrorist alone, but to fight terrorism as an ideology, to stop them from achieving their political objective, we need a collective response from various countries. Because this non-traditional security threat is transnational in nature. Secondly, state-sponsored terrorism was also condemned. Thirdly, organized crime and its nexus with terrorism was also recognized. Role of international agencies in basically countering terrorism was also recognized, which includes role played by the United Nations Security Council or that of FATF. And effective use of technology was also mentioned under this. And apart from this, a new areas or the new frontiers of terrorism was also recognized, which can be seen in the response of inclusion of cyber terrorism as a mode of emerging areas under terrorism. So basically, the No Money for Terror conference with the aim of curbing the terrorist financing and the objectives to have a multi-pronged approach, a collective approach, recognizing the nexus between organized crime and that of terrorism, condemning of state sponsorship, and the internal collaboration was reiterated during the No Money for Terror conference. And you had to answer in this regard for this particular question.